Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to another episode of Heart to Heart with Bree. And tonight, the Emperor and I will be talking about the World Cup quarterfinals. Please introduce yourself to the viewers, Emperor.
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you again for having me here, Bree. I appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to share time with yourself and your lovely audience. I am yours truly, the Emperor. Football player, coach, club owner, soccer referee, licensed USFB soccer coach, and a pure football fanatic.
Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to another. I would like to just let the viewers know. I know on the flyer that I had that Coach Andrew would be on. He he's in Jamaica, so there was a bit of a mix up with the time. But he is hoping to join us for this episode. But if not, if he doesn't make it home in time, he'll be with us on Sunday because we will be back to discuss the semifinals, which we're very excited about. So I have to ask you, it's just something after we did our last live, that game between Cape Verde and Argentina. I mean, how amazing was that game? And I have to ask you, what are your top three matches in the from the round of 16?
I will start by saying it's a bit of a disappointing for me as well that Andrew didn't make it on, and I apologize to those viewers. I've had a few people reach out to me, including Bruce, Teacher Thompson, for the link to get on, because he hadn't seen Andrew in a long time, and he'd asked me to to send a shout out to him for him. I always look forward to sharing the stage with my brothers. Our grandmother grew us up that way as 3 and 1 and 1 and 3, so we were
Yes.
always Andrew, Richie, and Jeff. So I was kind of like really looking forward to that as well. But Sunday provides us another opportunity to share the stage together. So I'm looking forward to that. And to your point earlier, you might still be able to join us for
Yes.
a portion of the show. But to your question, my three favorite matches so far, um, you know, I, I will say Morocco versus Canada because I got to see an African country got into the last eight, and that for me as an African being always fulfilling to see.
Yes.
I'll also say the USA versus Belgium because I'm sure there are a lot of people, including some USA fans and even some of the players, as I heard them talking after the game, were just a little bit too overwhelmed by the politics and
Yes.
everything that surrounded that game. So that Belgium won that game and won it so convincingly.
Yes, they did.
Kind of like just took some of that glare off of that. So and definitely I would say the Mexico versus England game.
Oh my
You
gosh.
Look, I saw
Oh
some
my
great football
gosh.
here. Right? There were two teams that was just determined to go through, by playing, some of the best football, playing to their abilities, not playing not to lose, as you've seen most teams come and set up. That's their MO, just not to lose the game and try to go to extra time or penalty or something of the sort. But this was a game where two teams just gave it the best they got, and that for me, was one of the three best games in that round.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I tell you the Cape Verde versus Argentina game was one of my top games. I tell you, I really admire what Cape Verde did. I mean, that was a very exciting game. Mexico versus England. I tell you, I'm an England supporter, and
Yeah,
I tell you, I'll say to I don't have high blood pressure, but I felt like I, was going through that watching that match. It was
yeah.
it was intense. It was
But
definitely intense.
those is like Cape Verde Argentina game. I agree with you. That was such a great game of football, right? And
Yes,
especially because it was such an unexpected game of football as well. Like
yes,
people expected Cape Verde
yes.
to be parking the bus and all that. I didn't mention that game because that game was in the previous round. That was
Right,
the
right,
round
right,
before the
right,
two
right,
game,
right, right,
right?
right. But
You know,
I just wanted to
yeah,
bring up that game because like it wasn't expected.
right.
And I'm not lying to you. I had tears coming down for Cape Verde because I wanted them to win that game so badly. So that was definitely a highlight for me from the World Cup. But no, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. I just wanted to mention that game because Oh my gosh, I was really, really, really excited about that.
Yeah, and similarly, we could have mentioned the Argentina versus Egypt game too. But I mean,
Yes.
for reasons beyond football, I didn't even
Oh my
include that in
gosh,
my top
that
three
was a
games.
heartbreaker for
Yeah,
me.
yeah. So, for reasons beyond the football that was played on the field, I didn't mention that, and
Yeah,
I
no,
went with
no.
my top
I,
three as
I,
well.
I
You
listen.
know,
I understand that. That I watched that game, and I tell you, because I work nights, it's been rough trying to keep up with these games. But I have been, and I tell you, my heart did ache for Egypt. I really felt bad for them. So now, in the last episode, we did talk about emotional intelligence. And I really wanted to address the France versus Paraguay game. You know, what was your opinion on that game?
that France versus Paraguay game. There were a lot that came out of there to me, but what pleased me the most is how it brought to me memories of the great Ronaldinho. And I'll say what I mean by that, because
Yes.
you remember Ronaldinho when he played, like he's always just playing with a smile on his face. Like I remember one game against England where Ashley Cole, when he was still playing for Arsenal, like went in on a tackle against him, and like Ronaldinho does what Ronaldinho do. He puts him to the floor, and he went to pick him up, and like he was there shrugging him off and being all, and Ronaldinho just smiled as he always does with his little buff teeth. And I saw the same thing from Kylian Mbappe, where like he was
Yes.
being pushed, he was being kicked, he was being harassed, like trying to get in his hand, but I still see, this artistry of skills and technique mastery, it reigned supreme for me in that game, regardless of everything else that was going on. So, and don't get me wrong, like I go on all the time about the artistry and the mastery of technique in an attacking sense, but I will say this, that defending 1v1 defending is also a technique that we should master, or teach kids and players how to master that technique of defending in 1v1 situations, as much as we lament and teach kids and go on about 1v1 attacking. 1v1 defending is also a technique. It's a technical skill that, I mean, Dondi taught us that, as kids,
Yes.
back in the day, so I'm not putting down the defending, but I'm saying it's not just about kicking the guy if you can't catch the guy. It's not just about pulling the guy or jumping on the guy or trying to get into the guy's head. It's about actually learning the technique, mastering the technique, and expressing the technique when you're caught in a situation where you're being challenged from an attacker who's got
Yes.
skills and ability. You know, so for me to see that played out in the way that it did, and the Spain team, kept a lid on it as much as there were these little flare up here and there. But what surprised me though in that game, Brie, is the fact that no Paraguayan player were booked. Despite their overly
Listen, and,
aggressive
and and my
stance.
next question, I'll be asking you about the referees. Why aren't they reprimanded? But I have to say to you that I was very proud of Mbappe. I was very proud of the French team because they did not resort to the dirty tactics. It's very disappointing to see players of such a high level resort to being so dirty because they're frustrated, maybe they're tired, and the desperation is there to win. you know why has that become a thing now? Because I've seen it more and more, but it's very hurtful when the referee chooses to turn a blind eye to particular teams or particular players when these things are taking place. I mean, what's your opinion on that?
You know, um, I genuinely cannot say, and maybe they were performing up to the instructions or to expectations. We've seen in previous World Cups, Brie, where referees have been reprimanded at very least, for their actions. We've seen, referees get kicked out of the tournament, or at least lambasted for their performances, and it being made clear that they won't further participate in the tournament and so forth and so on. With what has gone on in this tournament, and I've seen some things come to fore where people have dug through the archives and the statistics and saying there's been 9 VAR decisions against so-called established teams and lesser countries, and all 9, questionable though some of them may be, have gone against the smaller countries. We even talked in our time on about even the situation with Ghana versus your English team, where it was a clear foul in the box against the Ghanaian player, and it was never called. We saw even in the Argentina Egypt game where they disallowed a goal for Egypt from a supposed infringement against Lisandro Martinez way in the Egyptian defensive third. That is barely a touch on the guy. Went down the other end, and we see where 2 penalty appeals for Egypt weren't even considered, looked at, right? And both replays show that either one of those could have been adjudged a penalty when you've considered the penalty that was adjudged against Senegal versus Belgium, right? And other calls that have gone against the so-called lesser teams. And neither of those calls were even looked at by VAR. And Argentina went straight up the other end and, scored a goal, albeit a great goal by Lionel Messi. But, when you look at the consistency, that's just not there in terms
Yeah.
of the level of the referee. When you're seeing the Egyptian coach right now calling for FIFA to have a look at this and lodging a formal complaint about the way this was handled. Like, I genuinely do not know, sis, because a lot of these things happen in the boardroom that you and I don't get
Yeah,
privy.
no, trust
You
me, trust me.
know,
Yeah, I get it. I get it. I think it's wrong on so many levels. Like I think back to like Olympians who, you know, they didn't win the gold medal, and then it comes out years later that the gold medal winner cheated, whatever it was. And then they get their medal later, the proper medal. And to me, it's like, why even go through all of that? Because that person was robbed of their moment to stand on the podium, hear their anthem. They worked so hard for that honor. And I think it's unfair, especially in the World Cup. I mean, in any game, but I think if you're going to be a referee, there should be, it's unfair. And I think if you have to win by cheating, is that truly a victory? I mean, what do you think about that? People who want to win no matter what it takes, even if they have to cheat.
yeah, and I don't know that I want to go that far with it, because I wouldn't necessarily say that the players themselves are cheating. It just seems we're not playing on a level playing field,
Right,
because
right, right.
again, as I made it clear at the beginning of my answer to your question, is that I don't know exactly what's going on. I don't know if the referees are operating in accordance with the way they were instructed or they're expected to operate. So I
Yeah.
don't know that the players themselves are cheating.
Right,
That's
right, right,
something
right. No,
that
and so
are.
that I mean, like for the team, like the upper management, whoever it is,
Mhm.
if they are determined for a particular outcome. And look, I can't accuse anyone of doing, because I have no proof. But
Right.
it's like when you're watching something and you know what you have seen,
Exactly.
and it doesn't make sense to you,
Right. And, and
and yeah,
and to my earlier point, you had some of the U.S. players. Like, I listened to Tyler Adams last night on an interview saying, "Hey, listen, we had no clue that this was going on. Like, we learned about it the same way you learned about it in the media. It was surprising to us the same way it's surprising to you. So it's not like these players are championing these things, or these coaches. Like,
yes,
you heard Mauricio Pochettino sit there in his press conference, and I'm like, oh, he's so fired, But he's saying it clear, like, look, I don't like that these things are happening. I don't like that this political ball game is being played and so many people are involved. Like, we didn't ask for the player to be involved, right?
exactly.
But the player is involved. So if the player is involved, we have the right to use the player. To his credit, fair, right? But like that, so many things are happening behind the scenes, which seems so
Yes,
unfair to those of us on the outside looking in, right? But I'm standing in defense of the players and the coaches who are not necessarily the ones driving this
right,
this,
right,
this vehicle, right? They
right.
they happen to be in it, and this is the way it's going. So I think there needs to be a deeper look at what goes on in, as my friend Roger Premier likes to say, in the boardrooms, because this is heavily seemed to be influenced in the boardrooms because it just doesn't make
Yes,
sense to what we're seeing. You know,
it
even when
seems
they mock
to.
up the graphics of the VAR calls, like, look, I have very big eyes, and you know my eyes see what they see. And sometimes when they come back with those graphics, I'm like, that is clearly not what happened. That is
Yeah.
not what happened. You know, so yeah, we could go down a rabbit hole here, my
No,
sister.
no, and listen, your trained eye will see what I won't see, but even with my untrained eye, I have seen things that to me just were not right. So now, which leads to my next question. Sometimes I find myself asking, does FIFA love football? You know, and would you agree that FIFA needs to focus on the integrity of the beautiful game? You know, I like I said, I don't have proof of anything and I don't want to make accusations, but it just seems like with each World Cup, and of course, money is important, teams need to be paid. It provides an income for people, but I think sometimes it's easy to lose sight of the integrity of the game if money becomes the focus. I mean, what's your opinion on that?
You know, my dear Queen sister, I genuinely believe that football purists, and football fans like, us, would like to expect and believe so that FIFA does love football, and I'm not suggesting in any way, shape, or form that they do not. However, I feel that it is really important to understand who FIFA really are and the power that they wield. To begin to understand, to unravel what we're seeing, in front of our eyes. Um, the great Dr. Iman Black, our football legendary coach Dandy, he often speak on this institution, right? Um, just to mull this over, FIFA has more member nations, 211 to be exact, than
Okay.
the United Nations itself, right? And it has been around since 1904. They do wield a similar kind of power and tactics in terms of getting member states on side with them, as does the UN, in terms of threats or promises over investments or lack thereof. You know and we can look back to the former president of FIFA, Sepp Blatter, right, and an absolute legend of the game in Michel Platini from France, right, and the scandal that landed both of them with a ban from football, right. We can reflect to our own region here in CONCACAF, where there was a multi-million dollar scandal. I think the tune of $150 million was mentioned, that at our own Jack Warner from Trinidad and Tobago tied up in that, right? Chuck Blazer
Yes.
from the US, right, was tied up in that, right? And many other officials from this here region, right? So it operates to me like a mafia, with
Yes.
control, right? It gets to tell people like Jorginho and Pepe that they are Italian and Portuguese respectively. Like it gets to tell people you can switch nationality, like if you meet our criteria, like if you play a certain number of games and are under a certain age, irrespective of the country's own citizenship rules and laws. We've seen Qatar host the World Cup, right, without even a recognized football team or football league, right? And citizenship was being dashed out, for competent players to build up the squad. So
Yes.
this type of interference as it has marred this tournament, and it is, it's not surprising or unexpected, and it's more like a quid pro quo, and tit for tat.
Yes.
It's I do not want to say that our governing body doesn't love the sport. I genuinely don't want to say that. But I
Okay.
think our governing body has morphed into something bigger and more powerful than even the governing body itself perceived it becoming over these years and century even, and it, with so much money involved, let's be honest, it's like the game literally in this tournament at very least has become a four-quarter game. Not because it
Yes.
needed to be, not because it's any hotter than we've ever played in conditions before, but simply because, there's a lot involved beyond the football. And these people who make it possible wants, something for what they've put into it.
Yes.
And FIFA has the power to independently, regardless of how they claim this is a democratic exercise. We know it's not, because it can't be democratic if you're going to threaten me with something or withholding something in exchange for my vote. So I'm
Yes.
voting for it, not necessarily because I believe in it, but because I don't want to lose what I stand to lose if I don't go along with it. Which is what I
Yes.
talked about earlier in terms of the way this has been run in the same principles as the United Nations, with the same, threat or promise of certain things or lack thereof. So,
Mhm.
certainly they love football. They are the guardians of football. It's just that there's so much more involved that taint everything that we're looking at, and it's unfair on us, the purists.
Yeah. 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 I appreciate your response to that. From the round of 16, who would you say was the best team or and the best player that stood out in that round?
The best team and the best player. Um, I liked Morocco
Okay.
as a team, the best team, and I'll say this why I say that, right? Um, it's the fact that when you look at the consistency that they've played with from the first game against Brazil, right through their dismantling of um, Canada 3-0, right? It's been very consistent the way they've performed, and I like that. But when you think about the best players, for me, and it sounds like we're reeling off the names of the top players, but let's be honest, what they brought to the party, like regardless of what we feel about how the Argentina Egypt game played out, with the refereeing decisions, like the way Messi came to life in that game, and
Yes,
credit
he
to
did.
his coach as well for putting him in a position to be able to do so, because I watched the game intently because I watched it as a
Oh,
fan and I watched
I
it as a coach.
watched it too.
And when you think about it, like he was playing through the middle a lot, right? And when they went 2-0 down and was struggling to get back into the game because the spaces were sort of limited around him, right? The coach Scaloni made the decision to pull him out further right? So he could play with a lot more space and a lot more time on the ball. And he affected the game so much more, in my estimation, because I felt like Egypt was very well prepared for him playing in that pocket space in the number 10 role. And, the way he influenced the game after that, and even, the way he got on the score sheet from that position, like we cannot overlook that.
I mean,
I mean,
that's true. That's true. That's true.
I'm a Brazilian fan. You know this, right? I sit here every
Yeah.
day saying France is going to win the World Cup, and I want African countries to do well. But I'm a Brazilian fan. We know this, right?
Yes.
And to see the way Holland step up and put Brazil to the sword, regardless of how I felt,
Woo.
the way
Let
Brazil
me
lined
tell
up.
you, that was a good game. I wanted to message you after that game, but I said, no, I don't think it's a good time.
you know but I mean, I'm being honest, like, I mean, he did well to get them 2 goals, regardless
Yes,
of how I felt how Brazil played,
that's
because
true.
I have my own feelings on that. Yeah, I have my own feelings on the way the coach set them up. I have my own feelings on the way they executed the game. I didn't think that that was an authentic display of Brazilian style football. I genuinely didn't think that. But I do not want to take away from the exploits of Erling Haaland and Martin Odegaard and their teammates in that game, right?
Yes.
When I think about even the Mexico England game, right? Like, I know how much you sweated on that game,
Oh my gosh.
but Jude Bellingham stood up.
Yes, he
Jude Bellingham
did.
stood up and delivered two masterpiece of a goal, right? And even when they went down to 10 men. So when you talk about players who stood up, right, it is these players. And it
Yes.
sounds like you're regurgitating the quote unquote top players. But they stood up. They stood up
Yes.
and they did their thing, and they stood up and be counted when their countries needed them most. So I cannot, overlook or ignore their contribution. But as far as a team goes, they've not necessarily been flashy or the most creative, but they've been, for me, the most consistent in Morocco.
Okay. Okay. Um, watching the World Cup, I've noticed quite a few of our Arsenal players, on representing their countries. And so I had to ask, which Premier League team has the most players in the World Cup?
I think Man City. Man
It's
City
Man.
does.
It is Man City. When I honestly thought it was Arsenal, but yeah, I want you to talk about that.
Yeah, no, Man City has I think 19 players. And they're not just the most in terms of Premier League; they're the most in terms of any club in the
Yeah.
world. You know, um, Arsenal has 16 players. I think
Yes.
Crystal Palace also has 16 players. No, Crystal Palace and Man United. I think they both have
They
12
both have
players.
12. Yes,
Right.
12.
Yeah, and Liverpool, have 11 players. You know, but I will say that our Arsenal team, we have the most goal contributions in terms of any club. We got a 20 combined goal and assist, contribution. So, yeah, our Arsenal team are up there in terms of contribution to this World Cup. And also, I don't know. I mean, the Man City players have not looked into that. I've made it this far in the competition, but we still have the four England boys. We still have Odegaard there as well. We still have the three Spain boys. So that's eight players we still have there. Um, yeah, I don't know that any one club has that many players still left in the competition, but I could be wrong because I've not looked into it. But it's still a very good going for the Gunners.
Yes, yes. I had to go there.
Yeah.
Um, Now, who do you think will make it out of the quarterfinals?
So my semifinal picks are, I'm going France over Morocco. Though I
Okay.
would not be upset at all. As a matter of fact, I'd be delighted, to see an African team progress if Morocco was to triumph over France. But I genuinely believe that France will triumph over them just based on what we've seen, not just in this World Cup, but leading up to it. They are a very strong and powerful team with a lot of depth to it. Um, I think Spain versus Belgium is the most interesting and probably the most closely matched tie in
Okay.
this round. But I think Spain are the better team, and
Okay.
will edge it, and I certainly hope so, especially with the injustice that befall Senegal in the round of 32 that saw Belgium, got through that to, get into the last 16 to beat the US. I just feel like justice would be served if they went back into, But aside, all that aside, I really genuinely feel that Spain are a better team and have a better
Okay.
squad depth than Belgium. And Belgium are a good team. Oh, and Trossard is there too. So for now, he's still an Arsenal player. So that's even one more player
Yeah.
we have in this round, right? And I do think that England will get the better of Norway. You know,
I
um,
hope so.
hey, look, they got four gunners compared to one. Well,
Yeah,
I mean,
well, true, 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 true.
saying that Brazil did have two gunners compared to the one still on Norway, and Norway did
Yeah.
Norway did prevail over them, but I genuinely feel like England will grind it out this time around. And I do expect Argentina to get by Granit Xhaka and his Switzerland team.
Okay.
I think they are a better team and have more squad depth. So
Now, you know, and we spoke about this before we went live. And I'd like to, I know what you'll say, but
mhm.
I have to ask, is the men's trophy more important than the women's trophy? And and this is not about a gender bashing thing. I want the viewers to understand that, but there is a point that I would like to make.
Yeah, as you said, my queen sister, we did have a brief discussion about this before we came on here, and my stance on this remains true. And unfortunately, we still live in a male domineering world, where we genuinely don't see both gender or sex. I don't even know what's the politically correct term to use these days, but we don't see men or women, sadly, in most instances, as being equal. But what I will say is that undoubtedly the men's World Cup, it's more historical, right? It started in 1930, and it's much more popular, right? Especially because of the amount of money that's involved in it today, right? We talk about the game that's been around for eons has now all of a sudden been broken up in four quarters, right? Largely down to the amount of money that's in it. But what I don't like to do, as we mentioned, is like I just want to acknowledge that we have two great football in spectacle that we get to witness every 4 year, 1 year behind the other year, right? Because it's almost to me like when people say, um, you know, Lionel Messi versus Cristiano Ronaldo or Pele versus Maradona, right? And I like to come from the standpoint like, look, I mean, I'm a Brazilian, right? So for me, Pele is Pele. Pele is the
Yes.
king, right? But I would love to acknowledge that, hey, Maradona was also a great footballer in his right, as was Zico
Yes.
and Garincha and Franz Beckenbauer, right? As was, you know, Cristiano Ronaldo and Lionel Messi and Neymar and Kylian Mbappe, and that we get to see all of these people playing
What a
football.
privilege,
It
right? What a
is.
privilege.
It is. Right. So I don't want to, segregate them as which is better or what's more important. When you talk about Bonnie Shaw and our exploits in terms of number of caps and number of goals scored, right, for Jamaica, and even as a professional footballer, Jamaican footballer playing outside of Jamaica, I don't think any man playing for Jamaica stacks up against that.
It's true.
Should it be any less recognized because she's female? You know what I'm saying? We're talking about
Yeah.
football. We're talking about football,
Yes.
right? And it is what it is. We need to look at Marta playing for Brazil. Like I saw her
Yeah.
play for Brazil against the US a couple of weeks ago.
Really? Oh wow. Wow.
Yes, playing against girls who are like way more than half her age.
My goodness.
And that we talk about Cristiano Ronaldo and his longevity, and not to discount it at all. And the guy who played for Iran, I forgot his name now, that Cristiano Ronaldo overtook as the most capped, international
Yes.
player. But what about Marta? Right? Like, look, she's been going, for decades
Yes.
and performing at the top level.
Yes.
So for me, I just like to acknowledge that we are fortunate. We are fortunate to
Yes,
see
we are.
such high level football, from men and women, playing out on a global stage, every 4 years. Granted, one started way ahead of one. Like you make the time the point all the time we get together that you love football so much as a girl growing up, but they didn't play it in high school when you
That's
were
right.
growing up, so you couldn't get to play. You know, doesn't mean that you probably weren't a better footballer than Barry. Sorry, Barry.
You would lose this. Let me tell you, I am always excited, like when the men's World Cup is taking place right now. But I'm excited because I'm like, next year we can look forward to even, some more great football,
Yes.
and the reason why I wanted to ask that question is because I think sometimes the US, they forget about their women's team. And I look at the women's team, the US women's team. I think they were pioneers in the women's game. They won the very first Women's World Cup. They've actually won 4 World Cups. Four, you know, brilliant team. I look at Jamaica. First time they went to the World Cup, we knew that they weren't contenders for the cup. But when they came back the second time around, they made it to the round of 16. I'm looking forward to the next World Cup because I'm so hopeful for what they will do. I would like you to talk about, I mean, I've spoken to men who are like, they would never watch a women's game because they know it would be boring. I'm like, you just don't know what you're missing out on because the women, they play on such a high level. And I know with you coaching and your brother, I'm sure you've coached some young ladies who were very good. I mean, I'd like you to address that.
Let me tell you, my dear queen sister, and I will say, even when you think about the fact that not this World Cup, but the next Women's World Cup in 2031,
Yes.
when you think about the fact and the possibility that our little Jamaica of
Woo.
160 how much square miles, right, of 3 million people, right, will be playing host to a World Cup, right? That is monumental.
Yes, it
That
is.
is monumental, right? And Bonishaw and all our predecessors, right, and our current teammates and the future little girls watching them play football, um, are worthy of praise and lift up for this, right? And what that will do for Jamaica is unimaginable,
Yes.
right? You talk about the U.S. and their women's team. Like we talk about the game, like because I just watched the game. Like I told you, off here, like listen, when it comes on to football season on a weekend, my football goes from the youth games, the academic games go on, the women game that comes on before the men games coming on at 10 and 11 o'clock and 12, and I'm just football. Like I don't look. I could be going by and seeing three little kids out in the street playing 3v3 in the street. I'm stopping to watch.
Yes.
I am like, I'm not a men's football fanatic. I'm not a youth football fanatic. I'm just and I don't expect that everybody will have the same level of intrigue or interest in the game that I do. Like I'm not expecting that, right? But it speaks to me on levels that it doesn't matter who's playing, right? And I've seen some of the most breathtaking football. You've seen our women team, our Arsenal women team play football.
I tell
You've
you,
seen the Arsenal
these
women team play
women are
football.
not playing around. They're not. The standard is so high. Lucille just joined us, and she said I joined at the right time. And she said, "When is Jamaica hosting?" Would you give that information again, Richie, about when Jamaica's hosting?
Yeah, so there's talk about Jamaica playing host to the 2031 Women's World Cup. It's I don't think it's been finalized yet. It's clearly not been made public, but there is talk going in the background that there'll be a co-host for the 2031 Women's World Cup as well. So some games will be played in Jamaica for the 2031 World Cup if all goes according to plan. You know.
That
Yep.
is so exciting because that a lot of us will be making that trip.
Oh, certainly. Most definitely. And just imagine what that will do in terms of the eyes on the country, in terms of football and the investments that are expected to be made in the country for football. How many young girls and boys will now develop a further interest in football? When they're seeing, boys and girls from their community, from the neighborhood that they probably went to school with playing in a World Cup in their own
Yes.
country, you know? But I mean, to go back to your point, and I don't want to lose the train of thought about what the U.S. women's team has been to football, not just women football the world over, right? Because when you think of what they've done in football, as you mentioned, they're pioneers in the sport. Like they play the game on levels that no other country plays the game. And I'm sad. I'm a Brazilian fan, and like I said, I
Yeah.
watched them play against Brazil in Brazil a couple of weeks ago. And when I tell you that the Brazilian team, they came with such physicality, right? And we
Yes.
know what Brazil have in terms of their flair and their technical ability and their speed, and they brought that too. But they also brought a level of intimidation to that game. When I tell you
Yes.
there was like about 9 or more red cards issued in that game to not just players but officials for how testy and feisty the game was, right? But these U.S. players, they stood up. They stood up
Yes.
and they actually won the game, because I think the next World Cup is in Brazil next year. It's in
Okay.
Brazil. So I think it was part of the preparations for them to get acclimatized to playing in those, intimidating atmosphere and playing against, some of the type quality football that they will be coming up against. But,
Yes.
you know, it is a standard bearer for not just the women game, but just the game.
Yes, I
Just the
agree.
game, the level of, we sit here and we talk about the consistency that the Morocco team played with, right? And that is so, right? We talk about the France team and how much they are together, right? And how the quality of strength that quality and depth that they have. When you look at the women's team for the U.S. national team, it's no different. It's no
I
different, and it shouldn't be classified any differently because they're a different sex, right? It's just
Yes.
a fact that it's a quality football team that has been quality for years and been
Years.
been churning them out. Like the players that come into that team, it's almost the team seems to get better each time.
It's
When we
true.
lost players like Miam and these players, Brandon Chastain and all of these, you know, renowned players, when they were lighting up the world,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
players that were just
I agree. And look, I have to mention they won the first World Cup in 1991. In 1995, they came third. 1999, they won that cup. 2003, they came third. 2007, they came third. 2011, they were the runner up. 2015, they won. In 2019, they won that cup. That's an achievement. And, I just want people to remember them, that they have contributed to the game. They have contributed to the game in such a big way. And, I like the fact that they played a role in inspiring a lot of young women to play. I don't know who influenced Bunny Shaw. Maybe they were a part of that. You know, they were a part of her dream. Maybe she was influenced by them. I don't know, but when I Bunny Shaw, I'm so proud of her. I think back to watching her in that first World Cup, and then watching her come back, and it's just been an amazing journey. And I just want more girls to embrace the game and know that they can get out there and play at a very high standard.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, my queen sister. And one of the things that unfortunately we're dealing with in the world that we live in today is that we have a main driving force, that's spelled Money, and the
Yes,
people who have it, when they let it go, they want more to come back in return for what they let go off of, and I don't think they've quite unlocked the formula yet. Like my friend Anif always say to me, the Premier League is not the best league in the world, but the Premier League certainly is the best marketed league in the world.
yes,
So there is a thing there. So everybody, four corners of the earth, thinks that the Premier League is the best league in the world, right? Some may think it is, some may think it's the best marketing league, but you cannot underestimate the value of the marketing that goes into these things, right? They get a return on their investment. They see the potential to make a return on their investment. And I feel
yes,
like sadly enough, we're operating in a space where, you know, people with those funds to invest don't quite figure out or crack the code yet to make that return on their investment, which is why the women game still lag behind the men's game, despite its competitive nature, despite its interest, right? Despite everything else that it turns out with people like Bunny Shaw and Marta over the years, and Miam and Christine Sinclair in Canada, right? Like it's just not the thing that investors think, look, if I put 100 million in this, I'll get a billion out. So I feel
exactly.
like unless and until that becomes clear to them, sadly, you know unless football purists like myself and you who don't have the resources to do it, because these people, they're not football purists, let's be honest about it.
Yeah.
They're business people.
And
They're
it's
business
a
people,
shame.
so
It's a shame, but I would just like to encourage the male viewers who think it's a waste of time to watch a women's game. Just give it a chance. And I tell you, I think you would be pleasantly surprised. I mean, I am so excited that we have another World Cup to look forward to,
yeah.
next year. I'm really excited. And I hate to see this one coming to an end. I hate to see it winding down because it's been exciting. It has been very, very exciting. I mean, what do you think about it? Are you looking for, like, now I will say I will be able to sleep on a regular basis again because it's been taking away my sleep, but it's definitely been worth it.
Well, I'll say this because my queen says it like, yeah, and then when the World Cup is done, then there's the Premier League. I'm like, yeah.
Yes.
So football never stops for me,
Yeah.
so yeah, this competition will come to a close, and then the players will thankfully and rightfully so get some time off to rest and recuperate and spend valuable time with their family, and then get to come and put the show on for us again for another 8 to 9 months.
Oh my
So
God. I'm looking forward to it because it's like Arsenal, I'm hoping we can do it again.
yes,
I'm hoping
definitely.
we can win Champions League this time. But I'm just excited, and it's such a beautiful game. And you know I love other sports, but this is definitely my favorite game. And I always look forward to watching Arsenal, and I enjoy other games too, but it's just something about the game that has stuck with me since childhood. And you know I am not a wagonist, never could be. I saw that there's someone had a form on Facebook that as a wagonist that you can fill out. And I thought it was funny. I don't know if you've seen it, but I thought it was hilarious. But it just made me think back to childhood. I've been an Arsenal supporter since the age of, I think, 8. My brother's been a Chelsea supporter since maybe the age of 5 or 6. And we have never flip flopped on that. We have stuck by our teams. And of course, we've been England supporters. And yeah, we get upset when they have lost in the past. We're hoping this will be our year. But, and I'm going to ask you to say it again, Emperor. Who do you think will win the World Cup? I have to ask you this on every podcast to
You
see
know,
if
I
you'll stay the
I
same.
don't flip flop. You know, it's one of the things I feel you don't get to change is your team.
Yes,
But and I will say before I answer your question about the World Cup, the Arsenal women team they're making moves. So Barry and his
yes,
Chelsea dominant team and Man City and Bunny Shaw, they better watch out because we've
yeah,
signed 3 players so far, including Georgia Stanway from England. She left Bayern Munich and was a free agent, and
okay,
we signed her to a long term contract. And we signed a German player and a Swiss midfielder, Geraldine. I forgot her surname right now.
okay.
We've already been making moves. So, our Arsenal women team are coming back stronger for this WSL title. And our home games are in the Emirates. And well, I'm not saying they sell out every game, but they get good crowds in that
Yeah,
6,000 seater stadium. And they do sell it out at times. So, good things are
that's
coming.
exciting.
Yeah.
That's I mean, women's game has come a long way.
Oh, definitely. But I will say I'm still holding France, to be champions. I will flip if Morocco gets by them. Right, I'm going with my African brothers. Right, but
Okay,
for now, I still do genuinely believe that France does have the better team, as I've always believed from the start of this competition. Strength and depth, and they've been doing very well in terms of managing their players. So they're not
okay,
dealing with injuries or threat of suspension. With despite Paraguay's best efforts to get into their heads. Their emotional intelligence held firm. They stood their ground and got through that game without any liabilities. But I'm still looking to France to come out on top of this World Cup.
as a coach, do you think, like especially at the youth level, that emotional intelligence should be something that from a young age that's embedded in these young players? I mean, I think, like I said, I really admired how France maintained their composure. When you look every time I look at the video with the Paraguayan goalie throwing the ball at Mbappe and he just walked away. And I said, if that had been a different player, it would not have ended very well because not everyone has that level of restraint to just walk away from something like that. So, how important is something like this for the youth players?
Brie, like it's not a separate part of the game. And
Mhm.
fortunately for me, I was under the tutelage of one of the greatest football minds I believe there ever was in Dr. Ivan Black, football coach
Yes.
Don Davis, Dandy, right? And the way he taught us football based on the 5 pillars of the game, right? So football is established on 5 pillars, right?
Okay.
The technical aspect being one of them, and your technique is you pretty much your basic control, passing, dribbling, shooting, your individual skills. That's the technical aspect of the game, right? And then there's the tactical aspect of the game. This is where 2 or 3 or more people are involved in any phase of the game, whether it's attacking or defending or the transition phase of the game, right? That's a tactical aspect of the game. It's not just you, it's you in relation to your teammates or your opponents, right? Then there's a physiological aspect of the game, right? This is your physical fitness, right? This is your speed and your agility and your strength and your mobility, your flexibility and your endurance, right? That is your physical aspect of the game. This is the nutritional aspect of the game, right? That's the way you look after your body, right? What you eat and don't eat to be able to perform at the maximum level and recover, in a proper time frame, right? And then there is a psychological aspect of the game, right? And this is a part of the game that a lot of us are not familiar with. Like a lot of us don't understand. A lot of us don't teach to our uh, the people who are responsible for teaching the game because we don't understand it ourselves, so we can't teach it. Fortunately for us, we learned this, from a very young age, under Dundee, so we understand that what that means, right?
Yes.
Fortunately for us as well, he was a psychology major, so yeah, he's steeped in psychology not just from the football standpoint, but from a
Yes.
general standpoint. So we were educated that way, and it's not to say that Mbappe doesn't feel what these players are doing to him,
Yeah.
but I'm sure Didier Deschamps already talked to them, right? Not that he needed to because they're professional
Right.
players, but
Right.
no, about what they're likely to face, right? And have already formulated their plans of how to deal with it, right? When we were young boys playing for Titchfield and Conscious Movements and our local club teams, right? These were things that we went over in our training sessions and our preparations for the teams that we're going to face. We
Yes.
know who plays the way they play and what to expect from them, and we plan on how to deal with that, right? If somebody stepped on my foot or elbow me or charge into me, right? I know that my center back or my central midfielder or somebody else on my team, right? If they didn't see that, I'm just like, you saw that, right? And I know that I don't have to be the one to deal with that,
Yes.
right? But the next time he or she goes down the line with a ball perfectly placed enough for me to put a firm hard challenge in, that's not going to be a foul. That's not going to necessarily hurt or harm you, but it's going to put a stamp on you to say, I saw what you did to the emperor.
Yes.
So there is it's not like it doesn't hurt and you don't feel it, right? But you're trained to know that you don't have to be the one to deal with it,
Yeah.
right?
Walk
Or you're
away.
trained to know that, look, you have more to lose than to
Yes.
gain in this situation, right? But it's not foolproof. We saw what happened to Zidane in the
Yeah, right, 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 right. And I think
2000.
maybe France really learned from that. It's
Yeah,
like they will keep on reminding the guys because it's at the end of the day, it's not worth it.
no.
So I am proud that he was able to walk away, probably punched a wall or two when, when he was done. But, I am proud of him that he was able to walk away.
Yeah, but
I
to
have
your
to ask
point,
you,
my dear Queen Sister, there is a place for it. It is an
yes,
important pillar for a game, which is why we have our dear brother Dr. Scott Hamilton doing so well, not just in football, but in the world of sports, because
yes,
it's an important thing to have the psychological profile of athletes be
yes,
able to address not just what they're dealing with in the sport, but let's be honest, we're human beings who live
true.
outside of the sport as well, and a lot of our lives take place outside of the sport, so we bring all that onto the field when we get onto the field of play. So it's a very, very extremely important part of the pillars of the game.
I definitely agree with you on that. What are you hoping to see in this upcoming round?
You know what, my dear Queen Sister, I'm expecting to see some breathtaking, entertaining football that makes it all worth it in the end, and go just a long way in softening the blow of all the lies and injustices that have infiltrated our beautiful game from the start of this World Cup to now.
Yes,
Like, and we've seen that in flashes. We've seen that in glimpses. Like we sit here right now, we're still going about, Cape Verde and
yes,
DR Congo and even Iran with the injustices that they've faced and the way they've performed creditably, and just missing out on the knockout stages on goal difference, to that last goal that was it scored that goal? Was it Paraguay? Um, to equalize in the what 95th minute, to put Iran out on goal difference. So we've seen some very, very intriguing, entertaining stuff thus
yes,
far,
we have.
but I'm looking forward to more of that. Because now we're getting down to, let's be honest, the best of the best.
Yes,
Regardless of what we want to talk about in terms of refereeing decisions
yeah.
or any other injustices that have gone on before. Like now, we just want to see football that makes you go, "Wow, look at that!" So
It's it's been so exciting. It's been very entertaining. To be honest with you, this upcoming game with Norway, I don't even know if I'll be able to watch it. I won't lie to you. I don't know. My brother was telling me, be calm. Why are you worried about Mexico? But I felt like, Mexico's a good team. They're not a pushover team. And I didn't want to get caught up in, oh, they can't beat us. because I think every team can be beaten. You just never
Yes.
know. So I think you have to still have some humility, but I am definitely looking forward to that game, but I'm not lying to you. I'm a nervous wreck here.
Yeah, football is that. Football is that unpredictable. Football is that. And this is why we wanted to remain just a pure game, just a pure game where
Yes,
it's just the 11 versus the 11 on the field of play at the time, to decide the game based on who's got a better handle on their execution of their technique and their tactics, during the 90 minutes. We want it to remain that, because that way it's just pure and aesthetic beauty. So we
yes,
look
it
forward to
is.
that.
Yeah, I mean, definitely, definitely. And I'm here to say, look, I'm one of those supporters that when my team goes out, I am one of those that will cry. That's just me. I'm not ashamed to say that, but that's just how intense it is, and that's just how much we love the game and we want to be a part of it. We never want to leave. We want to lift that trophy like every other supporter is. They're wanting the same thing for their team, and
Right.
unfortunately, we know there's only one winner.
That's right.
That's the thing about it. Well, you know, I've heard a lot of people say they believe that France will win, just like you've been saying. I've heard some people say Spain. I've heard some people say Morocco, you know. But I'm really hoping and praying that England will do it this time. It's been too long. It's been
Yeah.
too long,
Yeah.
so I'm definitely hoping for that. So I'm looking forward to our next conversation, which will be on Sunday at 5 o'clock. And I am really looking forward to what happens over the next few days.
Yes. And, I'm certainly looking forward to Sunday as well, especially if my big brother could join us. But England has just as good a chance as all the other seven teams that are left in this quarterfinal round. I would not be mad to see England win. I mean, we got four gunners there. They're the team that has the most
Yes.
gunners remaining, right? Uh,
Yes.
I'd be ecstatic to see Morocco win. Listen, I'd be
Yes.
over the moon if Morocco win. I'll probably be in Morocco if Morocco win. So let's, as we've been saying, it's such an unpredictable game. It's such
Yes.
a game of artistry and industry, and the team that comes out with the most intensity, being on top of their game with the most level of consistency will prevail. And England, just like every other team, has just, and they have a great coach. They have a great coach who
Yes, they
changes when
do.
it needs to be changed. Let's be honest about that. So unfortunately, you guys are battling some injuries, and suspension. Especially in the position right back where you're most light in this tournament.
Yeah.
Mm. But you've pulled it off, to this point every time when it matters. So, you know, anything can happen.
I'm looking forward to it. Do you have any closing thoughts for this evening?
Thank you again, my queen sister, for giving me this opportunity. But I always want to go back because football is such a universal language, and especially in these times, I would love to take the opportunity again just to encourage my brothers and sisters who may be watching and listening, or who will watch and listen in the future, just to take a moment to, if never, at least during these times, to make that a practical reality, a universal and uniting language. There's a lot that's been going on about the injustices, right, and seemingly being meted out against the quote unquote lesser teams. And let's be honest, some of the Black African teams, most more so than any other teams. And it sadly just seems like a reflection of what's happening in our wider society, you know. And when we see injustice anywhere and pretend we don't see it, it does an injustice to justice everywhere. So we don't have to be party to it. I've seen a lot of people parting things, and my brother send me all these things all the time about Messi versus Ronaldo, and who's fixing what for whom and who's not fixing what for whom. I personally don't want to go down that road. I don't see what's going to be fruitful to our society, our sustenance, and our forward
I
movement
agree.
from any of that. What I would encourage us to do is to speak out against the injustices when we do see them, right? And do not fall prey to blaming our brothers and sisters for the injustices that have been meted out against them. We see that a lot where people get on the players, right? The players are there giving their best. They wouldn't have been
Yes.
there if they weren't intending on giving their best, if it didn't matter to them to give their best,
Yes.
right? They were once people that you loved, right? For all the reasons that we did love them, let's continue to love them.
Amen to that.
For all the reason that we stood up for them, let's continue to stand up for them. For all
Yes.
the reasons that we say football unites the world, let's continue to make it unite the world by being part of that unification and not part of the division or the subjugation.
Yes.
Let's make it matter because we all have a part to play in that, and we all can be a part of the unification or choose to be a part of segregation. And I choose to be a part of the unification. And I would encourage my brothers and sisters, do that, be that.
Yes. Yes. Thank you for that. Thank you so much for saying what those words. I mean, I couldn't say it any better myself. And I would just say to everyone out there, let's continue to love the game of football, and let's all be there to support our teams. And I'm so looking forward to our next meeting on Sunday at 5 o'clock, Emperor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, my dear Queen sister. And thank you all for your time for listening to us.
Take care, everyone.